welcome to the sixth session of the Circular African Cities Community of Practice. I'm just going to give a few seconds so that everyone joins before we officially get started. Okay, welcome everyone. Just a few house rules to get started. Please note that we are recording the session so that we have a copy for after this, so that anyone who would like to revisit the discussion is able to, but also for reference for our other speakers who, or other participants who were not able to join us. Excuse the sound, the background sound. There's a train passing by where I am. This session is also being hosted in both English and French. So if you would like to listen in French, please just go to the bottom of your screens. You will see a toolbox there with one of the buttons that says interpretation. Please just click that and select your preferred language to listen in. We also encourage active participation and engagement for today's session. So please feel welcome to anytime you have a question or a comment to make, to paste it in the chat, and we'll gladly engage with you. So today's topic is themed Sustainable Consumption and Production for a Circular Economy Transition, Changing Behaviors. But before we start, I would like to just get a sense of who is in the room and where you're joining us from. So can you please introduce yourself in the chat by just sharing your name, the city that you're joining us from, as well as what you are looking forward to for today's session. It would be great to just get a sense of everyone who has joined us today, just so that we also get familiar with each other before we get to some of the activities that we'll be having later on. Just an overview of our topic for today, or rather our why, is that we all have the power to impact and influence the circular economy transition on an individual level. And the role of individuals is very much as important as the role that research plays, that the changes that producers make, as well as the policies that our governments institute. And so today we are focusing on this role, but we don't want to do that in isolation of the role that other key stakeholders play in the circular economy implementation, actions and activities. So we will be hearing today from the role of producers in shaping consumption behaviors through extended producer responsibility, which is EPR, from Patricia Schroder, as well as circular economy businesses run, a circular economy business which is run by Mirai Charter. And then we will also listen to an experience from Lauren Aronsa, who has undertaken a household experiment that ICLE Africa hosted last year on a project on future lifestyles. Before an activity on our roles that we play as individuals, where we will all get to engage and share what our different reflections are on consumption behaviors for the circular economy. So let me just take a moment just to welcome everyone again. Thank you to all who have shared who's joining us, as well as where you're coming from. And perhaps just to point out some of the points that have been added in the chat. Ivy is working on her PhD on waste reduction using behavior change. So this is a good opportunity to learn more. Welcome, Ivy. Malonga is looking forward to the section on overcoming barriers. And we have a number of other participants. So it'll be interesting to hear what everyone finds interesting about the topic today, and we'll continue just seeing what your reflections are in the chat. But to jump into our first speaker, who is Patricia Schroder. So Patricia is a consultant and founder as well as director of Urban Elements. And just a bit of background on Urban Elements, it was established to supply an increasing demand for knowledge and support in sustainability, green procurement, circular economy, EPR, and much more. And the reason we called on Patricia to contribute to today's discussion is because of her background on EPR. She will be sharing a reflection on EPR and making some connections to how EPR impacts our consumption and production behaviors, as well as how to support the transition to a circular economy from that perspective. So over to you, Patricia, for first reflections on today's topic.
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to give some feedback today in terms of extended producer responsibility. Specifically, extended producer responsibility is a policy principle that is implemented through regulators in various, in various countries. To manage end-of-life, environmentally sound end-of-life management of products that are put onto market. And so the emphasis is on extended producer responsibility. So it extends the responsibility of end-of-life management of products to the producers that actually manufacture them and put them on market. So what does that mean? It means that producers or companies that manufacture products would need to take financial and operational responsibility for the management of the products at end of life. And this in turn has a ripple effect in terms of product management, and it's directly is one of the main factors for contributing to circular economy principles. So so the main thing in EPR systems is that a product that is put on market is assessed. A life cycle assessment is done on the products, and a whole lot of research and studies are done on the various types of products that are put on market, and that could be anything from packaging, single-use products, electronic products, lighting products, for example, paint, batteries, you name it. So EPR can be extended to all types of products that consumers purchase. So the EPR principle behind it is that producers need to pay a fee up front on the products that they put on market, and that fee is intended to manage the products at end of life. Now, the fee is determined based on a number of factors, and that factor and the main, I'll only highlight the main factors, is when the product is looked at and an EPR fee is determined. The first thing that is looked at is the ease of recyclability, the ease of reuse. Is there secondary markets for these recovered fractions or products that come out of the products? The design of the products in essence. So and should that be less favorable in terms of secondary markets and so on, the EPR fee is higher. So you can essentially call it a penalty for bad design. So so it is there to drive a change from a producer's perspective to design their products to be more friendly towards the waste hierarchy. So obviously design being the first thing, and then reuse, and then recycling, and so on. So to minimize any waste to landfill. Any products that are landfilled obviously attracts a higher EPR fee than any product that is reused for a certain period of time and is easy to recycle. And then it's also the producer's responsibilities as part of the fee that they pay, and that the funding of that fee goes towards consumer education and awareness. So they also need to contribute towards consumer behavior change. And obviously the consumers becoming more and more, in my experience that I've been in this, consumers are becoming more and more aware of products that are easy to recycle or are better for the environment. So it's a very, that behavior change is what's needed, because consumers will then in turn put pressure on the companies that they buy from to ensure that their products are eco-friendly and so on. So and the experience so far, I wear a few hats. So South Africa, where I'm from, has just implemented the EPR schemes, and other countries have been doing it for many years. Many European countries have been doing it for more than 15, 20, or 20 years. There's a few other countries that within Africa now that are implementing EPR schemes. I'm assisting on a project there where EPR schemes are being implemented in Ghana, for example. So again, it's it's fairly new to South Africa and the African continent. And the experience that I've had with local producers is there was originally a lot of resistance to this, because they felt that they're already burdened with costs and taxes and all the rest. So there was a lot of resistance, and the only way it can work is if it's regulated through the environmental authorities. So it has been regulated. It is a regulation. It needs to be complied with, and there are penalties should producers not comply with the regulations. In the absence of the regulations, it's a voluntary system, and it's the voluntary systems are not as effective as a non-voluntary system. So in terms of access to waste, getting the products back, consumer behavior change, and so forth. So yes, so that is in a nutshell what EPR is all about. It involves, it is quite complex. It involves complex mandatory take-back systems. So infrastructure has to be developed to allow for the ease of consumers to bring back products to certain points, so that it can be collected and brought back into the system, into the circular system. So there's a lot involved around EPR systems, and normally some companies will establish their own independent EPR systems, as they call the individual EPR systems, such as Coca-Cola, for example, and other but smaller businesses would join a collective, and that collective is normally done through a producer responsibility organization, where all producers are members, and they collectively within their sector, whether it be electronics or paper packaging, within their sector, they collectively allow the producer responsibility organization to manage those systems on their behalf. So it is quite, in South Africa, there has been a number of producer responsibility organizations that have been established. I represent two of them, and and that's in the lighting and electronic space and packaging. So yeah, so it is complex, but it is, I think it is the way to go in terms of addressing the financial issues that were brought up in the past. You know, to do this, we need money to be able to affect the change and to make people responsible. So as a financial mechanism, it is crucial, I think, if we want to see change to the broader audience or the broader stakeholders. And I think that's it. If there's any questions, you're welcome to ask. I think I've covered it in as briefly as I could.
Yes, no, definitely. Thank you so much, Patricia. I think that was a very great reflection of what EPR is. So I think we all now have an understanding of what it is, but also just the different aspects of it and how it affects consumers as well as producers, and what that then means for the individual who would then be consuming those products. And I think for me, what's emerging from what you're speaking about, or what I would really like to highlight is that consumers, like you mentioned, have a role in putting pressure on companies to take on EPR. And in cases where there's resistance, I think I also just wanted us to maybe just tap on that in this discussion here on what exactly then causes resistance, as well as what can be done to shift the mindset of producers to be more willing to do that. And I think touching again onto what you mentioned, which is that some companies are doing this on a voluntary basis through voluntary EPR. So what would be some of the reasons that a company is willing to take on that process? Before you respond to my question, maybe I could also just ask Lauren to come in and also ask her question or comment quickly.
Hi there, thank you so much. I just had a question about, so at the stage that we are now, do you think or foresee there being some sort of like identification with products? So like 1% for the planet, or what is this, the fair trade organizations? Like, is that something, like how do we identify those products if we don't know the organizations who are working on these things? Like, is there a trademark or something that goes onto products or packaging? And is that something that, I don't know, either you, or is there like a body that will look into doing that in the future, I guess?
So would you want me to answer that one first, Chair Lady? Yes?
Yes, so you can answer in any order.
Okay, all right. So that's a very good question. And I think, you know, the regulations, the EPR systems, and I can speak for South Africa and one or two other countries, the regulations basically require that each producer has to now label their products that they sell. So the labeling has to state that that the products are not to be landfilled. So, you know, the various icons and no landfilling and to please recycle and stuff like that. Now, in terms of how do we rank a product, if it comes from various sources, how do we rank the one is better than the other? That is something that is going to be looked at going forward by the PROs, although that is quite, you know, the regulations in South Africa, for example, give 3 years to do a life cycle assessment, and then there will be a ranking appropriately for South African producers or importers. So a lot of the majority of the producers under the definitions of the regulations are companies that import. So it would go back then to wherever the origin is of these products, and we would then need to work with building in that matrix, and I think it is very important that is done. So that, and it also is, it would be good for a consumer to be able to look at two products and see that one has a better rating than that one in terms of end of life possibilities. And yes, that is important. At this stage, it doesn't exist. There's only now labeling that's going to go on, but I think the ranking according to how green that product is at end of life, I think that is definitely it's within the workflow, but it won't happen within the next few years, and it needs to be a global thing. I speak for South Africa in this sense. And then to come back to your question on the resistance of producers, so a lot of the companies that are obligated, and I speak for South African in a South African context only, and I know that global companies suffered the same kind of problems during their startups years ago. You know, talking about producer responsibility organization, or EPR acceptance. So in South Africa, the main concerns were, as I said to you, is an additional cost that they have to now, that the producers perceive to be a tax, and their margins are as it is very low. So the main concern is if we want to be compliant as producers, and we pay this fee so that our products are managed at end of life properly. Is it going to be a level playing field? So although the voluntary systems was voluntary, now under the mandatory system, how do you get every company in South Africa to comply? And so you have your compliant producers and then your non-compliant producers, which is termed as free riders. So the compliant producers are concerned that if they comply and they add on, because the cost eventually passes down to the consumer, so that makes their product that much more expensive, and it gives the non-compliant companies an financial advantage on selling their products because it will be that much cheaper. So those are things that PROs are tasked with to address, and individual compliance schemes also need to address that. So that is the main concern, was how do we get everyone compliant and how do we reduce free riders? The second concern was that the fees need to be, obviously the more players that are participating, the more cost effective and efficient it is, because you are sharing costs amongst a greater group than a smaller group. So the fees, determining the fees on meeting all the compliance requirements, it's a very sensitive topic. So some producers have said even on the lowest fee, that it'll close their business because they are on such tight margins and so forth anyway. So, there's a lot of reasons why there's resistance. It's mostly around the financial part of it, and also companies that bring in really bad quality products are going to be penalized, and normally those products are the cheaper products in the cheap lines, and now it's going to make their cheap products more expensive. So and they've come back and said that they cater for low-income markets and so on. Now it's going to impact the low-income markets, but they're not, and they need to be educated that it's not just the impact it's going to have financially, but the benefit that is going to be seen from proper management of these products, especially in the low-income markets or the low-income areas. That's where you see most of your waste and waste management challenges and pollution challenges. So this will address all of that, and also there's positive spins to this where there's opportunities for skills development and job creation and so forth. So there's a lot more to just the negatives, and that's where the education comes in.
Definitely, thank you so much for that reflection. I think while on that point, apologies if I'm saying your name wrong, Pieta in the chat has put in a comment on EPR, as well as a report or a guidance report that you had published, which would be useful in that regard. But just your comment there, I was wondering if you would maybe be willing to come in and then just quickly share that in just 1 minute, so that we can then also have time to get one final reflection from Patricia.
Okay, thank you, Yokondo. No, that's just to say that in EPR systems, the eco-modulation is very important, and Patricia did mention that the eco-modulation depends on the environmental performance of the product. So the product gets bonus or malus, of course. And in this report, I shared the link. There is a guidance on how to implement it, what criteria could be taken on board. So it's recyclability, but also the toxic content or traceability. Many different criteria can be taken on board. But my question is also, Patricia, how to address the online sellers, whether today is a common practice that online sellers are also must be compliant with EPR or not, and if there are any obstacles or difficulties in this. Thanks.
Yes, so I personally I strongly support that online sellers must comply, whether you import it as a registered business and sell it through distributors or retail channels, or whether you imported via a online selling platform with a courier company delivering it directly to the consumer's door, you would need to comply, yes. Now, South African regulations were a little bit vague on that. However, the producer responsibility organizations are engaging with the big online retailers such as Amazon and so on to get them to comply, because in essence they fall within the definition of an importer if they're bringing stuff in. So and I understand the European Union is now drafting regulations around online marketing or online EPR systems. I'm not sure about that. I know there's a lot of talk going on there. The same topics of discussion will happen in South Africa, but we will definitely need to catch them in the net as well, because that we're seeing a big increase in products being sold online, and it's become more and more convenient for consumers just to buy their stuff when clicking on a screen. so we need to bring that in, definitely.
No, thank you so much, Patricia. I think maybe what we would do right now is just check if you have like one final reflection that you would like to share with us. And I know, Ivy, you do have your hand up, so perhaps could you put in your question in the chat and we would then take it on in the next discussion round. Over to you, Patricia, to share just one final reflection before we move on.
Oh, okay, sorry, apologies. Yeah, so I think EPR systems are a very good tool to assist. It's not the silver bullet, but it is a very, very good tool and a mechanism or policy to assist in mandatory take-back systems to for consumer awareness, for producer awareness, to design better, because if they design better, they have less fees to pay, and also that you know, the message needs to get out there that it's not just a financial penalty that must be seen as a negative. They need to see the positives that comes out of that as part of their sustainability and sustainability goals and so forth. So, and once I've seen, once producers get their understand this better and understand what it's all about, and as time goes on, I think there will be a lot more acceptance of that. But again, it's getting the understanding of what circularity is about and how it can benefit not just the organizations but the broader consumer space and so forth, and the environment. I think that's my last thought that I have there.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Patricia, for your reflections as well as just grounding the topic. Perhaps maybe just to quickly go to Ivy's question on where does the packaging of already cooked food from hotels, restaurants, and events even fit into this? I think it's definitely something we can discuss when Murray comes in to speak, because Murray's area of work is around packaging as an entrepreneur, and that's what his area of focus is. So thank you so much, Patricia, for joining us and sharing with us on EPR. Could I now then call on Murray Charter to share with us? So just a quick introduction before Murray speaks is that he is the director of Biosolutions, which is a circular economy business. And again, a little bit of background on him is that he did start his first business over 6 years ago in selling products across Southern Africa, and he has been in the sustainable packaging industry for the past 3 years on a mission to redesign packaging for circularity and to shift consumer habits and close the loop on packaging in Africa. So I'll hand over to you, Murray.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. And hello, everyone. My name is Murray. So as you've heard, there we're a sustainably focused packaging company. Our products are designed for circularity and closed loop. Essentially, our sustainability mandate is really to minimize packaging waste to landfill keep products in circulation and within our economy. So that's kind of from a sustainability perspective, our focus. Our customers are restaurants, cafes, coffee shops. Kind of think about it as food to go, food on the go, delivery, Uber Eats, Mr. D. Traditionally, like our packaging. Sorry, can you guys still hear me?
Yes, I still can. Mari, I can still hear you. While we wait for Mari to sort out his connection, he did mention that he is having some challenges today. Perhaps what we could do is, although we did say thank you to Patricia, maybe just ask you to perhaps respond to the question that Ivy had shared in the chat on where packaging of cooked food from hotels, restaurants, and events fits into the EPR scheme.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Okay, so packaging from hotels, restaurants, and that, you know, that's a tricky one, because if it's used and it's used packaging, which means it's probably got foods residues and stuff on it, it makes it tricky to make that desirable for packaging recyclers to take, because they have an extra effort and expense to clean off the any residues and stuff like that. But I think that doesn't exclude it from the EPR systems. I know in South Africa there is EPR systems does cover converted packaging, such as KFC boxes and packets and bags and stuff like that. Obviously, the EPR systems would address the contamination issues, but it does definitely fall into EPR, and it just requires specific focus on the actual management thereof at end of life. Yes, I think that's it. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. Thank you so much, Patricia. While we wait to see whether Mari will be able to reconnect, perhaps we can go on to our next speaker. So maybe just to start off before I call on Lauren, is that in 2021, as a Care Africa, we hosted a two-part workshop on envisioning a desired future city with low carbon lifestyles. And this was part of a project on 1.5 degree lifestyles. And it was essentially a project that sought to investigate the impacts of consumption on lifestyles on climate change. And we focused this project on Cape Town, and specifically Cape Town residents. And following the workshop, where we tried to envision what a future Cape Town would look like as a sustainable city, we provided the participants with a list of activities that would help them reduce their carbon footprints, and had a discussion on whether some of the options that were listed were practical for the Cape Town resident, but also then narrowing these down and identifying whether they could then take on a 4-week household experiment to try out some of the activities and basically document what their experience was in incorporating these into their day-to-day activities. And so we've called on Lauren today to share what her experience was with committing to those activities. And as we consider the ways in which we are shifting the status quo on how products are consumed as well as produced, as has been shared by Patricia, we're looking at how we then shift towards the circular economy and considering ways in which we could then adopt activities that would allow us to lead circular lifestyles, and the role that we would then play in facilitating this transition as individuals. So Lauren is a professional officer here at Eclair Africa, and prior to joining the experiment, which I'm sure she will talk about, she was I would say quite conscious on how she contributes to sustainability, but also through the experiment had identified different ways in which she could further this and identify more activities that she could take on. So what we'd like to do is hear from Lauren and then jump into an activity and hopefully be inspired from what she then shares on what we could also take on as individuals for the circular economy transition. So over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Kudu. So before I go into the activities that I chose, I just want to say that I've always been a firm believer in community, and that like small changes that we make at an individual level can have a really big impact. So this 1.5 degrees lifestyle project was particularly interesting for me because it gave us a list of activities that are seemingly sometimes some easy and some quite difficult to take on depending on your habit building. And those include things like repairing your clothes instead of throwing them out, recycling, composting at home, eating at home more often than eating out, showering instead of bathing, using local tourism, and like turning off the lights when you leave your like certain rooms. And a lot of this I already did at home just over the years, having taken on different things to try to be more sustainable on a personal level. And then part of this 1.5 degree like experiment, I decided to do two things that were a little bit harder for me that I always thought I would try to do, but I have didn't have the time or didn't make the effort to do it. And the two things was to monitor my household electricity usage and then also reduce my geyser temperature. And on the reducing the geyser temperature side, I at home have one of the automated, which turns on and off. So it turns the geyser on and off to a certain temperature, and I can set my geyser at 50 degrees instead of the standard kind of 60 or 70, which normal households are set at. But you can also just turn your geyser temperature down on the geyser itself. And this for me was kind of a really easy step, because once you turn that temperature down, you kind of forget about it and you don't notice the difference in temperature between that 50 degrees or that 60 degrees or higher. So it's something that if you did, there's no kind of barrier to entry, because once it's done once, you don't have to think about it and you can continue your lifestyle or your life around that. Whereas like for me, the monitoring electricity, I was doing it manually. And at the time, it was probably during, I think, some sort of lockdown in Cape Town. So I was stuck at home anyway. So checking and monitoring my electricity was something where I had to go to the electricity box, check the number, write it down, and kind of monitor what the usage was. And then within that, I was also looking at kind of noting down the activities we did in the day. So whether we used the washing machine or the dishwasher, or if if 3 people or 4 people showered in a day, or like just to see what kind of spiked the changes in electricity monitoring. And this for me, because it was something that I had to do and I was trying to do at a regular interval. If it doesn't fit within my schedule, it was something that I hadn't built into the habit of checking, I would skip a few days, and it wasn't then I would like pick it up and be like, oh, I'm supposed to be doing this, and then I would do it again. But for those 3 weeks, it was a lot more effort to do it because it wasn't part of my habits already, and I had to sort of remind myself to do it. And I think that is the big difference between when taking on certain lifestyle changes, whether it is recycling or composting at home or turning off your lights when leaving a room. It's one, you have to want to do it, and want to contribute and kind of maybe see the bigger impact of that on a global scale. And then 2, it's also, you have to build it into your habits, in my opinion. So if your recycling bin is right next to your normal garbage bin, you're more likely to potentially recycle something when you're right there. Whereas if your recycling bin is like in your garage or something, and having to walk that extra distance to put that thing into your recycling bin is also another barrier to entry. Or for example, if your area has a recycling program that's supported by your city to collect your waste separately, I think that makes a difference versus if you have to, in Cape Town, a lot of areas people have to either pay for that service themselves or they have to take it to the recycling facility. And that's another level of or another barrier to entry in terms of doing recycling. And I think if you reduce those both personally and align them with your habits, as well as have that support from like city level or local government in terms of infrastructure, you might get more uptake of things that are more aligned to more sustainable 1.5-degree lifestyles.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for that reflection. I think what I found really interesting when you were taking on the experiment was just the value in having infrastructure in place to support your processes. I remember when we were having the discussion around transport and, for example, one of the reasons for not being able to then fully take on, say, the use of public transport around your city was that limitation of the public transport system ends at a certain point or is not as convenient as driving would. And if it's something as basic as you just need to get to work at a certain time, you try and take the easiest route possible to get you there, because you do want to get there on time and you do want to be present when you arrive at work and be able to be functional. So it's never just the sole responsibility of you as the individual to do that. And while there are a lot of behavioral changes that you can take on, it's also important for there to be a system and a community around you that supports your efforts. So I think you've touched on what limitations you experienced when it came to taking on these activities, as well as what may have made it difficult. But I think something that I want you to hopefully somewhat emphasize is speaking to how something can then, how an activity or a lifestyle change can then be built in long term. I know you had mentioned that these are activities that you had been interested in prior to even the experiment. So would you be able to speak to what that looked like, perhaps even just growing up, how those were activities that were somewhat embedded in you and the way in which you think?
Sure. So I think it comes down to, I was fortunate enough who had parents who forced me to be outside and appreciate nature. So we would camp a lot as kids. And although I hated it and I wanted to spend the weekends with my friends in malls, I appreciate it now as an adult, because I think I have this sense of wanting to protect what we might lose. And within that, this idea around community and wanting to improve or a better life for everyone. And I think that was just embedded in the values of what my parents were teaching me, how we engaged with the people in the communities around us. And for me, that's always been a strong reason why I studied what I studied civil engineering, which was all around. I thought the idea was that I could help the greater community by taking on some of this civil service, and now into sustainability, hoping to, influence some sort of change or encourage some sort of change. And then wanting to lead by example, I think, is also a big thing, and something that came from my values, the values of my parents. So if I'm not doing it by myself at home, like how can I expect someone else to take on what I'm recommending or suggesting? So, and then a lot of that was we always had recycling. It was called like anti-waste back in the day. So like at schools, it used to be like recycling the telephone books or bringing your paper or glass. And then that turned into bigger recycling systems. And then we were also fortunate enough to have garden space to do a compost. So in high school, we had to create a compost and do vegetable gardening, which was again, about access and privilege and the schools I went to. So these things sort of built up over the years. And then I got to a point where I was like, okay, well, I'm trying this in this area. What else can I try? What else can I try? And kind of have moved along over the years to different practices and seeing what works for me. Because as you did mention, some of it is based on where you live and what you have access to, and what fits within your lifestyle. You're on mute, yeah.
Thank you, Lauren. Definitely, and I think it ties on to the discussion we've been around EPR as well. I think something that was mentioned earlier on, or something that I also reflected on, was that producers do have a responsibility to shift the way in which products are made. A behavioral shift can become quite easy if something already comes to you in a sustainably packaged, or in a manner that makes it easy to not have to consider what you're doing with a waste product, and it being an intuitive process. So could I also then just call on Patricia for a different perspective, or a question that you might have for Lauren, and then we'll go on to Ivy.
Yeah, thank you, Jakudu and Lauren, for the insights. And you've just spoken about behavior change towards individual practice. So what do you think, and the other participants think, about sanitary towels, diapers? Because those are one of the problems we have, especially now that we are looking into EPR schemes, because the composite products are usually a challenge. I've seen in Japan, they have technology to recycle diapers, but what should be the direction in our case in African cities? Should we adopt such technologies? Should we switch now to the reusable sanitary towels, diapers? What's the thinking? Because I don't see much of this being discussed in forums, yet it's a rising quantity of waste in the general municipal waste, and it's a challenge in even segregation of waste at source and sorting even at secondary and at tertiary level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I don't know if that's something, Lauren, you would be able to respond to, and I'd definitely be interested in hearing your perspectives if you had some. But actually, to Patricia, I think for me, so that's a question I would have actually asked you to get a sense of perhaps where the role of government comes in supporting these processes. Just the example that you've given on nappies and how those are disposed of. I think where I come from, that's one of the biggest challenges that most people in our community are struggling with right now, which is how there's a culture that has emerged of just tossing them anywhere and everywhere and somewhat collecting them, and people building structures to dump them. And that speaks to the challenge of waste management in our community. We find that our municipality is not always able to collect waste, and so what the community does is they find an alternative to doing that, and it's not necessarily one that is beneficial for the environment. So it then goes back to, again, what Patricia was presenting on, is that there is a role that your producers then do play, but it needs to be an effort that comes from everyone in society. Perhaps it's policies being put in place to change mindsets, to push producers to produce products differently, and to be innovative about the ways in which products are designed. I see a comment coming in on technology that is required, and it's actually already there. So what are we doing to push for this to happen within our communities? Could I then call on Ivy to ask your question or share your comment?
Okay, so continue from where you left regarding the disposable diapers and then the reusable napkins. I think, like just Lauren said, if we are to wait on government to probably bring up policies that is going to ask us to shift to a particular way, it might take longer. So probably we could work on the individual activity basis. And as an individual, if you're committed to pushing towards a safer environment, then you will tell yourself, maybe I would rather go for a sustainable nappies and not go for a disposable one. So gradually you will get there. So I just want to share something about how people kind of change or live a sustainable lifestyle. And Lauren talked about how her family, her school kind of influenced her to be who she is now. I kind of have a bit of different motivation. I didn't have parents who were so knowledgeable about this. I didn't go to a school that encouraged us to do anything sustainable. I kind of feel it's something that I was born with, that even in my home, my dad would argue with me, why would you want to know the number of people who are going to eat before you cook? And I go like, I don't want to waste food. Visitors come and they say something, my dad goes like, you don't know, this lady wouldn't waste anything. So I kind of, something that was innate that I was born with. And with time, I kind of have been learning more and making my life better regarding how I want to see the environment. And regarding people learning and knowing, it's strange to know that there are people who know so much, actually engage in government policies to help move to a circular economy, are doing researches in that area, but have refused to use their lifestyle as a medium of change. That is why I kind of commended Lauren when she said, having individual lifestyles to push the general change is very important. I have a colleague who is actually doing her PhD in plastic use and all that, and she wouldn't even go shopping with her own shopping bag. And so I'm like, so what are you looking for? You are a whole research on your own. What are you looking for in other people? And she always gives an excuse why she cannot do it. So the last time I put my bag, because I always have my shopping bag in my backpack, and she's like, Ivy, look at you, you have this small bag. Imagine my whole house. If I should go to the market and buy a whole bunch of banana, or how can it fit into this? I'm like, okay, you always want an excuse not to use it, so it's granted. Just go ahead and do what you want. So it's not very easy. I would encourage all of us to have that individual lifestyle that come together to make that greater change that we're all looking for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivy, for that reflection. I think it's very important. I think, firstly, the small changes that we all make will have a huge impact on what the collective looks like. And something that you're bringing up that I also wanted to touch on was that idea of culture and how that shapes the way in which we use and consume products. And something that we have been having discussions around with the circular economy has been discussions around it being embedded in a lot of African cultures. And so while I'll call on Lauren to share her reflection, I think maybe something we could also start doing in the background is start to think through, well, as an African or living in the African continent, what activities have you seen that are circular but very indigenous to, say, a community, and the way in which they live that should actually be preserved and highlighted more as a way of living and doing. Over to you, Lauren.
Thanks. I just wanted to say to Ivy, so I'm one of 4 girls, and none of the others are as caring about the environment. I'm the annoying one who encourages them to do all the things. And I've always been interested in, and I'm not sure why, like what changed between when I grew up and what experiences my siblings have, and what was the thing that had that shift in me to make me want to do these, to lead a more sustainable lifestyle with like no personal excuses for myself. I don't know the answer to that, but whatever that is, if we could create that instance for everyone else, maybe we would have more people who want to lead these more sustainable personal lifestyles and for greater change. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for pointing that out. And I think it also speaks to what Ivy was referencing, which is that although she may be taking on circular practices, not everyone who is in the space is doing so. And it just shows that we do need to have these conversations around what role we as individuals play. It's very important for us to continue doing the work in our various organizations to push for circular economy, but we also need to identify ways in which we can support the efforts that we are working towards on an individual level. Something that I want us to now jump into is an activity around circular economy, lifestyle changes that we could all take. And so I will quickly just start sharing my screen just so that we can jump into the first activity. So my colleague is going to paste in the chat a link to menti.com. So if you do not mind just clicking on, I've accidentally closed my browser. If you could just give me a moment to get that back on. Okay, thanks for the patience, everyone. If you could just go to menti.com on your browsers by just clicking on, by just going onto your phones and typing menti.com and putting in the code that has been shared in the chat, or alternatively clicking on the link that is given there. And the first question that we want you to respond to is, what does it mean to you to embrace a circular lifestyle? So if you could share what adopting circularity means for you on an individual basis and what that would look like. We're interested to hear what your perspectives are. 2 inputs have already been shared. One of them is it's to get a product's maximum utility if required after repair as well. Another is reflecting on this meaning to think about the end of life of products you choose to buy, and selective choice of products that are circular. Someone else is saying it's think before you buy. Another is saying that sustainable choices are the most affordable or the most convenient ones. And there's also a reflection that it means actively identifying and evaluating how you can reduce the production of waste, not only in your personal space, but also in your greater community. Another reflection is saying that it means a lot to them and that they're already doing their best for that lifestyle. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel like a good citizen of the earth. So these are definitely great reflections, and I'd like to get a few more reflections. So if anyone is having trouble going on to menti.com, please just shout and we will help you. Once more, as a reminder, you just have to go to menti.com and type in the code 4686684 to share your reflections. While we wait for more responses to come on, perhaps I would like to ask anyone to just unmute and share as well what it means for you to embrace a circular lifestyle. And perhaps for me, something I would reflect on is what it means for me on an individual basis is trying to find ways in which I reduce the amount of waste that I create, but also trying to identify products that are sustainably produced and that are designed in a manner that they are modular, they are able to be recycled if I don't need them anymore or shifted into another product. Something I constantly think about is how I access, is how I managed using my phone. I've tried to keep it for as long as possible, but I had a fright when I discovered how much it would cost me to fix all the problems that the phone is having. And then also just realizing that the way the phone has been designed means that companies are trying to get you to buy a new one. And so it stops functioning as well as it did initially. And you're just put into a trap to then purchase a new one. So what changes can you then make, or what changes can our producers make to help us adapt? Someone else is also saying that it means small changes which collectively could lead to something significant. I will then take us to the next question from the poll, which is that for the second question, we would like to find out what challenges would stop you from adopting a circular lifestyle. So if right now you were to then leave this meeting and decide that you would like to adopt a circular lifestyle, what changes or what barriers would you experience in trying to take this on? I know from our discussion, we mentioned the experience from Lauren, which was the barrier of lack of infrastructure to support the use of public transport. Something I can also think of is another challenge for me would be going into stores and finding that everything is sealed in a plastic, and sometimes not all products need to be sealed in order for them to remain viable. Someone is also pointing out that financing as well as availability of alternatives and services is a huge barrier. We're also seeing cutting down on meat being a huge barrier. The initial cost of circular products, that's definitely a huge one. I think when we think of the way in which circular economy encourages redesign of products, means that something has to be made with quality from the jump, and that means that most likely it's going to be quite expensive. But again, what we need to start doing is thinking of, well, what does this mean for how we think? We should also now start thinking that we should be willing to put in the money from the very beginning in order to ensure that what we do purchase can last a lifetime. And then what we then just have to think of is perhaps the maintenance cost to upkeep. Someone else is mentioning that a huge barrier is the lack of circular products available, as well as access and affordability. We're seeing products can sometimes be too expensive. Someone is noting that they are unclear about what options are most valuable contributors for the circular economy. That is definitely a good reflection, and I think we will get to that in a moment, to trying to explore, well, what are the options that we should be taking on for a circular economy? What activities should we be taking on that would then support a circular economy transition? I will then move on to our third question. So this then is, what would you require from producers and government to adopt circularity? So I'm going to give us a moment to think through what we would require from our producers in order to adopt circularity, but also what would we then require from our government in order to shift the way in which we access products, the way in which our cities are governed, the infrastructure that is provided to us to support a circular economy transition. One that I can list from many of the cities that I've been in is adequate public transport, and where it's adequate, ensuring that it is also affordable. Another thing I would need, for example, is for my products to be long lasting. I would also require options. I think some of these have been mentioned in terms of the barriers that emerge. We would like to have more options that would allow us to take on a circular economy approach. What's coming out from the inputs that you're sharing is you require ambitious regulation, stopping subsidies for unsustainable solutions, and instead shifting subsidies to more sustainable ones. We're seeing that polluters must pay for non-circular products, design products for circularity, and governments should provide infrastructure and develop policies, as well as law enforcement. We're also seeing the need for incentives and regulations. We're also seeing a requirement for policy from government, from producers, policy for packaging materials which are easier to recycle. Perhaps at this point, I'd also like to find out whether there are any reflections that people will share from what has emerged from our discussion around EPR, but also from the reflection that Lauren had shared. So I'm happy for you to all continue sharing some of the changes that you would like to see from your city. Malcolm in the chat has pointed out that sometimes we just need to get back to the basics. There's a lot that we can all do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge change, but it can be something that that is quite small. And that speaks to the point that Ivy you had shared when you were commenting, which is that sometimes it comes in small changes, such as just changing the size of the bag that you use to go grocery shopping, ensuring that you keep it with you at all times so that you're able to access it once you leave the house, or if you spontaneously decide that, okay, I'd like to go grocery shopping. What I'd like to do right now is just share a few resources that can help us think of ways in which we could adopt a circular lifestyle. So we've had some ideas from our speakers, as well as our participants who have reflected ways in which they've adopted more sustainable lifestyles, but now speaking to what exactly would these activities look like when it comes to the circular economy. So the first resource I would like to share is an ACE Africa catalog. So Eclair Africa last year had created a catalog that was meant to inspire businesses to take on circular economy within their businesses and to adopt these activities. And so what I would like to do right now is just share my screen again to showcase the catalog and some of the ideas that were shared in the catalog. Give me a second to share my screen. So this is what the catalog looks like, and it essentially provides some ideas that businesses could take on for the circular economy, but many of these can be adopted by individuals. So although you might not be able to conduct a life cycle assessment or connect producers with food, certain things that you could then think about is trying to purchase products that are designed to be adaptable, and trying to search for these. Alternative things that you could do is, for example, finding products that are designed to be regenerative. So, for example, using products that you can then compost at the household level. So the catalog gives you multiple options that you could take on. Here in this example, we're seeing how businesses are encouraged to incentivize environmentally positive actions. And this would include, for example, companies sharing or encouraging their customers to come with a cup that has already that they can continue using instead of using a disposable version of that, and then reducing the fee of your coffee when you bring your own cup. Other examples is companies providing more environmentally friendly foods, and that requires then us on an individual basis deciding that we would like to take on we would like to eat more sustainably. We would like to eat, say, more vegetables. Someone had mentioned in the Menti activity that they would consider reducing the amount of meat that they eat. So there are a number of activities that we can then all undertake. Another Another resource I would like to share is earlier on, I had given an overview of the Future Lifestyles project that we had undertaken. And in this link, you will be able to see a list of activities that we had identified that, that Cape Townians could take on. And I think a lot of these can be applied to any other context. But as I had mentioned earlier, I would like us to also think of ways in which we can take on these activities at the household level based on what we may have grown up doing. So at home, what activities did you take on that would have been considered circular? So for example, here we see options to compost your kitchen waste. We see the suggestion to perhaps invest in an electric vehicle. We're seeing the option here of purchasing quality clothing as opposed to clothing that would not last as long or that is mass produced with no intention of it being able to last you even one season of the year. There's a suggestion here to perhaps use ebooks instead of buying a hard copy, and perhaps buying just one hard copy of a book that you really like, but purchasing the rest of your books as ebooks. We're also seeing the option of relaxing outside as another option to take on. So instead of driving around, perhaps you could go to the park in your community and relax in the park. We're also seeing here to reduce the meals that you eat at restaurants. So perhaps going on a picnic with food that you would have created at home. Here we are seeing the option to work from home. These are activities that we've seen being more acceptable during the pandemic, as well as considering what a post-pandemic world would look like. Here we're seeing one which we have already spoken about, which is using public transport. So there are a number of different activities that we can all take on to support the circular economy. And then one resource that I did find that I think would be interesting for everyone in today's session is that ING has given a list of 5 tips to embrace a circular lifestyle. And the suggestions that they've given is firstly, how often do you use a product? So consider borrowing, lending, or leasing products that that you might not need to own. When it comes to fashion or high fashion, what ways in which can you shift the way in which you fill your wardrobe? So are you purchasing clothes that will last you a lifetime, clothes that you can shift from one season to the next? How can you reduce the amount of fashion waste that lands in our landfills? A third option that they have then suggested is, should your banana be wrapped in plastic or out of conscious packaging? So considering the way in which you collect products from the store, you could perhaps request that your products be weighed and the cost be determined based on the weight of your product, as opposed to you having to wrap it and instead buy an amount that you would need as opposed to more than you would actually require. A fourth option is supporting companies that endorse the circular approach. So for example, although we were not able to hear from Murray in today's session, we would have heard about his business, Virus Solutions, which if you just do a quick Google search, you can learn more about what Virus Solutions does and how they offer sustainable packaging to many businesses around the global south, but also very much in the Southern African context. And so seeing ways in which you can shift the way in which you support businesses that are actually contributing to circular economy. And then the last one being embracing the lifestyle and making it a daily habit to help to close the loop. So I would like to hear from everyone as to whether these are options that you would consider taking on, and whether any of these interest you and whether you would take them on. So perhaps while you think of them, we can then go into the last activity. and identify whether these are options that we can take on and would be excited to adopt. Maybe just to check quickly what's been shared in the chat. Pieter has mentioned that maybe instead of investing in an electric vehicle, the priority solutions is that governments can improve public transportation and make that accessible and affordable. So I would like to hear from everyone who has remained in the room, whether any of those options would be interesting to you and whether you would be keen on taking these on. I would like to hear from anyone as to whether these are activities you would be interested in taking on. Animesh, you have mentioned that you would be interested in some of these activities. Could I call on you to maybe share with us which ones you would be interested in taking on?
See, like I'm connecting from India, so like from the perspective, I'm a doctoral research scholar in the field of circular economy. So I am trying to understand the business perspective, circular business perspective. So which includes like many of the points which have been discussed a few minutes back, like the sharing model in businesses. Like if you take a small example, like say suppose homestay tourism, okay, so where you can utilize the single room of a community and can use that space to rent someone who comes as a tourist, and at the same time you can generate some economic from that. Similarly, like we have been looking at some sharing models, vehicle sharing models. In at least in Indian context, I can see Ola, Uber, and all these models are already there. So, like many such models can be promoted, can be like small startups which have just started but struggling to some extent. Those models can be studied, and those the learning of those models can be shared in the larger community, so that in future some of the business models which can come may be more robust, and they can contribute in a better way and help in achieving sustainability through circular economy.
Yes, no, definitely. We definitely need models that can help us with the transition. Maybe just to also pull out some of the reflections that others have shared. Ivy, you're also noting that there are interesting activities and you're doing some. Could I maybe check if you would be interested in sharing what other options you've taken on for the circular economy outside of, for example, shifting and carrying a bag with you so that you are not necessarily contributing to plastic waste?
Okay,
See, currently, okay, so yeah, please.
You can go ahead.
Okay, so one major thing that I had to do this year was to shift from using sachet water to refillable bottles. And actually, I put it in the chat so that I'll share my story on LinkedIn as how the barriers I had to go through to be able to finally make that shift. And it has been a long journey, and I'm really proud of myself that I finally did it. So no more sachet water in my house, just my 19-liter refillable bottles, 2 of them, and anytime that they are empty, I have to go back, which is another challenge I have to go through, but I'm ready to do that. So that is a huge thing I have done so far regarding living a secular. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ivy, for reflecting. Adora, you've also noted that there are very interesting options, and absolutely you would take that on as long as there are systems and communities to support. Is Adwa still with us? Yes. Do you mind perhaps just sharing a little bit about the reflection you've added in the chat?
Hi, everyone. So drawing from what Ivy shared, I mean, coming from the same context, I kind of understand all the efforts she puts into doing some of these, but we don't have a very supportive system here. I know that even as a child, I was taken into composting. Anytime we had waste food, and we didn't have a dog at the time, I had a small area at the back of the house where I would put those food. And with time, I realized that all the plants I grew around those areas were flourishing. So it became something that I really took a keen interest in. Long before we started learning about composting in school, I learned about it in school. I was privileged to be in a boarding school, an all-girls school, where we were taught how to plant simple things like garden eggs, aubergine, and other vegetables. So we had the opportunity to do some of these things whilst young. And growing up, it always stayed with me, and I've never changed my ways. Even in my house right now, I have a small place where I've planted all sort of stuff, plantain, banana, coconut. I'm still growing with it, but we live in a world where we are quickly becoming a concrete jungle. Very nice establishments with no trees or potted plants or stuff like that around. So for me, doing some of those things has helped. I have these bags that I take for shopping. They are material bags. I don't mind reusing them. I come back and I just wash them, and then I'm good to go for the next round. And then I kind of like when I'm going to the fish market and I know I have to go and buy stuff like tilapia, and I always go with my own containers. I buy them because I'm tired of bringing the black rubber bags home. And I mean, it's hard to use because I don't have any use for them in my house. So even when I buy stuff, I'm like, you know what, keep your bag. I can put it in my own. So I've been doing some of these things, like I said, but where you don't have a system that really supports, like the transport system, and Ivy can tell you much about the transport system here. If you really need to get to work and the traffic is just too bizarre, I spend on the average 6 hours a day on traffic. Going 3 hours, coming back 3 hours. So sometimes working from home, I find it more pleasing. Like today, I'm working from home, so it's easier for me. I wake up and then I go straight to work. Vis-a-vis staying in traffic, wasting so much fuel and the like. And it's nice for us to think about switching to electric cars, but the cost of cars like that are just off the roof. We don't have a system in country that supports some of these lifestyles. We don't even have a very good solar program in country. So yes, it's difficult. If we have a government system or a community system that supports some of these activities, it would go a long way. But if you are like Ivy, who is the Lone Ranger, I'm sure where she is, she's the only one doing some of these things. And I haven't found a lot of people around me who do the things I do. It becomes a bit difficult, and sometimes you feel demotivated. That's what I wanted to share.
No, thank you so much for sharing, Adwa. And I think Ivy has put in the chat saying that she can totally relate. And I think many people would be able to relate to some of those challenges. I definitely do not think I've gone through having to sit through 6 hours of traffic on a daily basis, but I think these are many of the challenges that we need to start reflecting on an individual basis. If we can identify what in our everyday lives needs to change in order for us to support the circular economy transition, we can already identify what our asks will be from businesses, from our local governments, from our national governments, in order to support a change and a shift towards more circular cities. And so just again, reading some of the comments, the people around you will make you feel a will make you feel like it doesn't count, but that shouldn't necessarily stop you. One of the principles that shapes circular economy, especially from the work that we're doing at ICLEI Africa, is that it's important to rethink. And rethinking is rethinking the way in which we design products, rethinking the way in which we consider what the circular economy is and what it means to us on an individual basis. If we internalize what it means to make that transition, we're able to better articulate what we require to change in the environments around us at the community level as well. And perhaps also a reflection that's come from some of the discussion we've had today is that, like I had earlier mentioned, many of us come from communities and cultures where circular economy activities can be seen on a daily basis. One that I'm reflecting on right now is an example that we've heard of from Uganda, as well as probably many of the East African communities, which is that banana leaves can be used as a way of covering food, as a way of serving food, for example. So these are some of the practices that we need to try and ensure that we preserve. There are ways in which we are managing our resources and how we use them. Perhaps we don't even necessarily need to invest in this. If you have a tree and it produces banana leaves, those are pieces that you can continuously use. So definitely finding ways in which we can adopt circularity on a day-to-day basis, but doing so with activities that don't require too much of a change from us or an investment in the way in which we already live, and trying to not necessarily constantly just run for what the trendiest thing is, but to think actively about what that means for ourselves. So maybe just to check if anyone in the room has one last reflection to share for how they could change behaviors towards a circular economy. I see a lot of people in the chat have mentioned that these are very interesting solutions. So not to pick on you, but maybe if I could ask Mokenti to also share a reflection on what you found interesting about these solutions to everyday challenges that you might face. If Mokente is not with us, perhaps we could also go to Mhlengi, who has also mentioned that you are interested in taking on some of these initiatives. So perhaps trying to find out from you what might have stood out.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Mokente.
I was just looking for took time looking for my unmute button.
No problem.
Yeah, I'm here. That's me. I'm in Botswana, in Gaborone.
Wonderful.
I recently, using an online carbon footprint calculator, I was horrified to learn how high my carbon footprint is and the kind of mitigations I would have to do if, for example, I wanted to plant trees in order to mitigate my footprint. I was horrified at the number of trees I had to plant. So one of the things that took my footprint so high was in the use of water. I travel quite a bit, and I'm a big meat eater. And so I find that I don't eat perhaps as much vegetables as I ought to. But even more importantly, I should plant more of my own vegetables, and which I'm not doing at the time, even though I have the capability to do so. Now, these are small changes that I can do. I can walk a little bit more. I can use my bicycle to reach if I want to visit my neighbor rather than take my car, that type of thing. That's it.
No, those are wonderful reflections. Thank you so much for sharing those. And also just reflecting on, sometimes it may feel daunting to take on these activities, but also on the other hand, when you do measure what your impact is, and perhaps maybe we should also try and remind ourselves that it's not only about the impact of the activity on the the global carbon footprint, but identifying that sometimes those small steps are what can help us to make those larger shifts towards a more circular lifestyle. We have come to the end of today's session, and I just want to say thank you to everyone for the reflections that you have shared. One thing we have been doing over the course of the past 6 sessions is that at the end of the sessions, we've been asking you to follow a link that we have shared in the chat on a paper series on circular economy in Africa, examples and opportunities. If you do have a chance to please read the papers that are included there. There are about 8 articles which cover topics of fashion and textiles, food, policy, finance, all about the circular economy. And if you do have a chance to please review and provide feedback for these papers by clicking on the link that has been shared there. We're looking forward to your insights, but also thank you so much for the contributions in today's session. Thank you and bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.